Welcome to the Write Good Books podcast, the audio companion to WriteGoodBooks.com, with your host Jason Bougger.
Hey everybody, this is Jason, joined again by our co-host Scott Michael Childers. Last time we talked about copyright and went long enough to split up into two parts. So we'll start right off where we left with a couple of questions I have for Scott about trademark.
Okay.
You write a novel.
Yes.
You take a publishing deal. Copyright is defined as however. Do you or the publisher own trademark on the individual characters of that novel?
Well, here's the thing. Who files for that trademark protection? Because trademark is, you have to actively pursue it. As opposed to copyright, trademark is something you have to file for, and the trademark office goes through, sees if anyone else has something similar in that same type of market, and then will give you a trademark, a protective mark in those cases. It's not automatic by any means. So this is why some brand names, they go out and they trademark themselves. Some of them, they've tried to trademark, but common usage makes it obsolete, like Kleenex. Kleenex technically was a trademarked term, but a lot of people use it, even though the generic term is facial tissue. But yeah, trademark, that is something, who owns those characters. You could go out and try to trademark those characters, but as a writer, it's probably not going to it's probably not worth your time unless you plan on becoming a multimedia mogul. Usually it's done more for visual depictions. So unless you're planning on having a standard look for your characters that will be on all cover art and all advertising, in that case you'd be trademarking that artistic view, as opposed to your textual, the way you wrote that character. Now, if you have a series name, you may trademark the series name, I believe. So if you're going to say the Childerstone Mysteries, I like that. I'm going to keep that one.
Do it.
You may be able to do some trademark protections under the series name.
That makes sense.
Especially if you have a trade dress around that too. But generally, characters you don't worry about until you get into multiple types of things.
So the Star Wars example, the story and the movie would be copyrighted. C-3PO would be a trademark.
Yeah.
Well, the Star Wars whole...
Every little piece of the Star Wars universe has been trademarked in some way or fashion.
Sure.
But here's the thing, that the movies themselves have additional copyright protection.
So you would trademark the brand, you would copyright the individual movie script. That's kind of a basic understanding. The copyright is the per thing. So it's still complicated.
Well, and that's why there are copyright lawyers out there and intellectual property rights lawyers. It is not simple. There are going to be these weird niches that have no clear definition. For one part, because they haven't gone before a court of law, which is where the real decisions on these things happen. It's usually the judges that make the decisions on a case-by-case basis. Especially, we talked fair use. That definitely is actually decided in a court case. Now, you and the intellectual property owners could come to a settlement, but that still doesn't actually decide definitively if your use was fair use.
So you almost do trademarking. Trademark is a proactive step.
It is a proactive step, but I would not recommend that authors pursue trademarks, again, unless they're going to do a multimedia type of thing. I mean, you could, but usually for that, trademarking something that's just text, like a character in a book or a story, I wouldn't, because there'd be so many places where a defendant could say, see, this is where it's different. A visual interpretation is more likely than need a trademark protection. Again, in my point of view. So, yeah, we're not trying to turn our listeners into copyright lawyers. But having a basic understanding of there are differences, this is how to protect yourself from accidentally calling down the wrath of Disney.
Right.
And also to give yourself some protection from predatory publishers. So it works both ways, and it's a good thing to have just a rough understanding and knowing that if it feels wrong, you may want to go ask someone. Right? I think that's what the goal is out of our discussion here with this. And I will say that copyright, trademark, all the intellectual property stuff, it could change. So kind of keep your ears open and watch what's going on. They usually do the discussions about every time they have to renew copyright. It's usually when Steamboat Willie could possibly fall into the public domain. And we haven't even talked about public domain stuff.
Yeah, let's define it.
Okay, public domain are works that no longer have copyright protection and no longer under trademark protection.
Now, is that because a certain amount of time passes, or the owner stops trademarking?
Yes.
Yes, for both.
Yeah. Here's the thing. Before I think it's 1926, I'd have to double check that date, but before a certain date, at this point, it's all public domain. So, Wizard of Oz, the original books, public domain. Sherlock Holmes, under public domain, and recently the characters have been, according to a court case in England, I believe it was, the characters may now be public domain. And so you could remix Wizard of Oz. In fact, many places have done so. There's been mini-series on TV, other movies. You don't need to do, if you're using the stories. Now, if you're using the movie, that's different. That's still under protection. There's a period between the late 1920s and 1973, I believe, where you had to apply for copyright and renew it. Now, there are certain movies out there that were made by big studios starring big stars that they forgot to file copyright and are now in public domain. And normally, these are the ones that you see in those budget CD or budget DVD bins. Some fly-by-night thing, put forward a bunch of DVDs using public domain, maybe or maybe not using a good source. But movies like Charade with Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn, major movie, public domain. They forgot to file. There's a bunch of others, but that's the one that comes to mind. It's also one of my favorites movies. Then after 73, 76, whatever that date is, then they put in the automatic copyright that we're talking about. So when we're talking about how do you know? Well, look at the date. If it's really old, it's probably already lapsed in the public domain. If it's in a certain gap, it may or may not. You may need to double check. And if it's after 76, assume that it is still under some sort of protection. So there's your rule of thumb.
There's so much to know, and that I think that's always the fear that you accidentally break copyright, violate copyright.
Okay.
So, say you include song lyrics in a short story, and you shouldn't, and you don't credit it. Like, is it up to the owner of the copyright to come after that?
Well, there are no copyright cops.
There are no, okay.
Right? So it would be the owner of that IP coming after you with a lawsuit.
Okay, so that's how it's enforced. It's basically...
Or a cease and desist order, depending on what the work is.
Right.
If it's been something that's already been mass-produced and published and out there in book form, there's probably going to be a lawsuit.
Okay.
If it's something that can be taken down, there'll probably be a cease and desist letter.
Okay. So you put up a YouTube video with a bunch of Metallica songs in it.
Oh, okay. Well, you said YouTube, but that changes the playing field a bit, but go ahead.
But they, then Sony or whoever it is, I don't even... The record label goes to YouTube, says pull it. That might be it. But if they find out, say,
you got 6 million views last week on it and you made some money, then will they still pull it? Will there be a fine?
Well, generally in YouTube, they have they have two things. There's some automated tools. I'm not saying they work really well, but there's some automated tools out there that'll actually either block or pull automatically. Then most of it is someone reports it, and then your video gets blocked like that, and it's up to you to defend the video that you uploaded. Say no, that this is not the music video for Metallica or any of the Sony artists. That just happened to be playing in the background. You can upload a revised version of the video without the soundtrack or something like that. But with YouTube, it's anyone can file the claim. Even people who don't have a valid claim. But it's up to you to defend the claim. So
yeah, that's a little different world then, because they also police it as best as they can.
No, they wait for someone to file.
Okay.
There's just too much content for them to actively police it.
Oh yeah.
There's some algorithms that try to identify, and then it's all based on claims.
Okay.
Now, here's the thing: the lawyers for the big IP owners, they've got things that do searches on YouTube and Dailymotion and Google and looking for their content, and then they'll file these automated removal under the DMCA. And what's funny is sometimes these auto things put in requests to remove stuff from their own clients. Like the firm representing Sony filing a takedown notice against Sony Pictures because the two parts weren't talking to each other. So yeah, it's an interesting world when it comes to takedown notices. As authors, you probably don't have to worry about that so much unless you're doing book trailers. And if you're doing your own book trailers, there's plenty of sources for public domain or copyright free music and pictures and effects. So you've got plenty of resources if you want to make your own book trailers. But yeah, in your own stories, that is going to be a letter or a lawsuit. You're not going to get some automated copyright cop knocking on your door. And in some cases, you're able to say, oh, I thought this was an orphaned work. Can we work out some deal to keep it in press?
Okay.
So.
Okay. That's interesting stuff.
Again, copyright, trademark, fair use. It's a crazy topic.
Yeah, it is. I guess the final thing I wanted to ask about, I guess this would also protect against plagiarism.
Oh, okay.
Is that...
Yeah, here, plagiarism, it's really a term used in academia, right? Yeah. Usually it's just copying in another... Well, there might be plagiarism. Plagiarism is also in journalism, too. But it's the same type of thing. If someone plagiarizes, the plagiarism is an ethical violation.
Okay.
The copying and copyright violation, that's a legal violation.
Okay.
So you're doing the same action, but in that you're doing two types of violation, an ethical and a copyright. And I will say in some cultures and in some legal systems, one or both of those is completely fair game.
Okay.
So plagiarism is not looked down upon in some cultures. It doesn't matter where the original source was. We're just sharing information.
Okay.
Some don't have the same copyright rules as the U.S. So that's another thing. Most of what I've talked about today is for U.S. listeners.
All right.
So there is a slight difference between plagiarism and copyright violation, but the same action could actually fall under both those terms.
Okay. Okay, well, I think we're at a good place to stop for now.
We better stop, otherwise I'm going to have to start charging legal fees, and I'm not supposed to because I'm not a lawyer.
Yeah, who knows? You might have more questions now than you did before.
Yeah.
So, it's complicated stuff. I think I said about 3 times already, but in theory, it protects us as writers.
Absolutely, and that's the main thing. Is the same thing that gives us protections is also something that we want to make sure that we don't step on another writer's
Right.
craft
Right.
and their assets, basically.
Okay. Well, thanks for listening, and check us out on the web at www.writegoodbooks.com/podcast. We'll see you next time.
See ya.